The dust cloud on the horizon signaled Sarah Daniels' arrival at Orville Zane's ranch, her trembling hands clutching nothing but a worn Bible as her swollen belly pressed against her threadbare dress. Colorado Territory, 1871, was unforgiving to a woman alone, especially one carrying a child and fresh wounds of grief. Orville spotted the approaching wagon from his porch, squinting against the setting sun. At 32, he'd built Raven Creek Ranch into one of the most prosperous properties outside Silverton, Colorado. But the success had come at the cost of solitude. 6 years alone had hardened him, taught him that survival in the West demanded keeping to oneself. Yet something about the slow, struggling approach of the wagon stirred something long dormant within him. "Whoa there!" he called, striding toward the approaching vehicle. The woman at the reins looked half dead, her face gaunt beneath a sunbonnet that had seen better days. Her eyes, though even exhausted, they burned with a fierce determination that gave him pause. "Madam, you lost?" Orville reached for the horse's bridle, steadying the animal. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat parched from days of travel. "Mr. Zane? Orville Zane?" Her voice cracked, barely audible above the wind. He nodded, guard immediately raised. "That's right. I'm Sarah Daniels. My late husband, Thomas, spoke of you. Said you were friends in the war." Her hands tightened around her Bible. He said if anything happened to him, I should find you." Orville's face darkened, memories flooding back. Thomas Daniels, they'd fought side by side at Antietam, saved each other's lives more than once. News had reached him months ago of Thomas's death, supposedly in a mining accident in Denver. "Thomas is dead?" he asked, though he already knew. Sarah nodded, tears welling. 3 months ago, the mine collapsed. Her hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. "I tried to make it work in Denver, but—" She looked away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "The landlord gave me 2 choices when I couldn't pay the rent, his bed or the street." Orville's jaw tightened. "So you chose the road instead?" "Thomas always said you were a good man." Her eyes met his, a silent plea in them. "I don't have anywhere else to go." For a moment, Orville said nothing, just studied the exhausted woman before him. Taking her in would complicate his carefully constructed isolation. Yet the memory of Thomas, the life debt between them, weighed heavy. "I've got a spare room in the house," he finally said, reaching for her small bag. "It ain't much, but it's yours until you figure things out." Relief washed over Sarah's face, followed quickly by a grimace of pain as she tried to climb down from the wagon. "Careful now," Orville said, awkwardly offering his arm. "How far along are you?" 7 months, I think." She accepted his help, her legs nearly buckling as they touched the ground. "Thank you, Mr. Zane. I won't be a burden. I can cook, clean, sew." "We'll worry about all that tomorrow," he interrupted, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You need rest first." The ranch house was modest, but solid 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting area with a stone fireplace. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. Orville led Sarah to the smallest bedroom, which contained little more than a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. "Bathroom's out back," he said awkwardly. "Kitchen's stocked. Help yourself to whatever you need." Sarah stood in the center of the room, clutching her Bible to her chest. "Mr. Zane, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he replied gruffly. "Ranch life ain't easy, especially not for a city woman." "I'm stronger than I look," she said, with unexpected firmness. Something in her tone made him believe her. "Get some rest, Mrs. Daniels. We'll talk more in the morning." That night, Orville sat on his porch, smoking a cigarette and contemplating how quickly his solitary existence had been upended. Thomas Daniels had been more than a war companion. He'd been the closest thing to a friend Orville had allowed himself, since losing his family to influenza in '65. The debt he owed Thomas was clear, but taking in his pregnant widow was far more complicated than Orville had anticipated. Inside, Sarah unpacked her meager possessions, 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a photograph of Thomas, and her Bible. She ran her fingers over the worn leather cover, finding the familiar passage that had sustained her through the darkest days. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered. "I shall not want." The words provided little comfort tonight, as uncertainty gnawed at her. She'd gambled everything on finding Orville Zane, on the promise that her husband's old war friend would help her. Now that she was here, the reality of her situation settled heavily on her shoulders. A pregnant widow with no money, no skills suited to ranch life, depending entirely on the charity of a stranger. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the baby kick. "We'll be all right," she murmured. "We have to be." Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Sarah dressed quickly, determined to prove her usefulness. She found Orville in the kitchen, cooking bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," she said, hovering in the doorway. He glanced up, seemingly surprised to see her up and about. "Morning. Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you." She poured herself a cup, then asked, "May I help with breakfast?" Orville shrugged. "Nearly done here. But there's eggs if you want to scramble some." They worked in awkward silence, the sizzle of bacon and the scraping of the spatula against the pan the only sounds between them. When they sat down to eat, Sarah studied her host for the first time in proper light. Orville Zane was tall and lean, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh Colorado sun. His hair, once dark brown, now had streaks of silver at the temples, and his eyes were a piercing blue that seemed to see right through her. A scar ran along his jawline, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something dignified about him, a quiet strength that reminded her of Thomas. "How did you know my husband?" she asked, breaking the silence. Orville took a sip of coffee before answering. "Met in '61, at the start of the war. Both of us joined up with the Union forces at the same time. Got assigned to the same unit." He paused. "Thomas was a good man, better than most." "He spoke highly of you," Sarah said softly. "Said you saved his life at Antietam?" "He saved mine too, more than once." Orville's expression darkened. "I was sorry to hear about the mining accident." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "It wasn't just an accident. The mine owner knew the supports were failing. Thomas complained about it for weeks." Her voice hardened. "After the collapse, the owner paid off the right people. No one was held responsible." Orville's jaw tightened. "That sounds about right for how things work these days." "Thomas always said justice was harder to find out west than gold." She looked down at her plate. "I tried to fight it, but a woman alone—" She trailed off. "Law's different out here," Orville agreed grimly. "Man makes his own justice most times." They fell silent again, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Finally, Orville cleared his throat. "I've got work to do with the cattle today. You should rest up." "I didn't come here to rest," Sarah countered. "I came here to work, to earn my keep." "In your condition? Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Mr. Zane. Most of them while working fields or tending homes." Her chin lifted defiantly. "I won't be treated like I'm made of glass." A flicker of respect showed in Orville's eyes. "All right then. Kitchen needs cleaning, and there's mending to be done. I'm not much with a needle. I can handle that." Sarah rose, gathering the breakfast dishes. "And Mr. Zane, thank you again for taking me in." He nodded once, uncomfortable with her gratitude, then grabbed his hat and headed for the door. "I'll be back for dinner." With Orville gone, Sarah set to work, grateful to have something to do with her hands. The kitchen was functional, but clearly maintained by a bachelor pots, stacked haphazardly, cupboards disorganized. She cleaned thoroughly, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. Afterward, she explored the house, noting the sparse furnishings and lack of personal touches. No photographs adorned the walls, no trinkets gathered dust on shelves. It felt like a place where someone existed rather than lived. In the sitting room, she found a bookshelf with a surprisingly varied collection volumes of poetry, history texts, and well-worn novels. She ran her fingers along the spines, wondering about the man who read them. The sound of a wagon approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Through the window, she spotted an older woman pulling up in front of the house. Straightening her dress, Sarah went to the door. "Hello there!" the woman called cheerfully. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair tucked beneath a sensible bonnet. "You must be the woman Orville mentioned when he stopped by the general store this morning." "I'm Sarah Daniels," she confirmed, opening the door wider. "Dorothy Quinn, I run the store in town with my husband. The woman bustled forward with a basket. Orville asked us to bring some things out for you. Said you arrived with next to nothing. Embarrassment heated Sarah's cheeks. That's very kind, but he shouldn't have. Nonsense, Dorothy interrupted. That's how we do things out here. Help each other when times are tough. She set the basket on the table. Besides, it gave me an excuse to come meet you. We don't get many new faces in these parts, especially not young women. Sarah helped unpack the basket, finding fabric for dresses, sewing supplies, and some preserved fruits. This is too generous. Orville paid for it all, Dorothy assured her, though I did throw in some extra jam, my specialty. Her keen eyes took in Sarah's condition. When are you due, dear? Late August, I think. Sarah unconsciously touched her belly. Well, we'll need to get you set up with some baby things. Dorothy's warm smile faded slightly. I was sorry to hear about your husband. Orville mentioned he was an old war friend. Yes. Thomas died in a mining accident 3 months ago. The words were becoming easier to say, though the pain remained fresh. Dorothy patted her hand sympathetically. Life out here can be cruel, but there's kindness too, if you know where to look. She glanced around. Orville's a good man, though heaven knows he keeps to himself. Been alone too long, if you ask me. Has he always lived alone? Sarah asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Dorothy's expression grew somber. No. He had a wife, Margaret, and a little boy, Joseph. Lost them both to influenza back in '65, just after the war. She lowered her voice. He never speaks of them, but those who knew him before say he changed after that. Bought this ranch and pretty much withdrew from everything but his work. The information gave Sarah a new perspective on her taciturn host. Loss had shaped him, just as it was now shaping her. I should get back to town, Dorothy said, gathering her things. But I'll come check on you again soon, and when you're feeling up to it, you should come into town. It's only 5 miles down the road. Thank you for everything, Sarah said sincerely. After Dorothy left, Sarah returned to her tasks with renewed vigor, determined to repay some of Orville's kindness. By late afternoon, she had cleaned the kitchen, mended several shirts, and prepared a hearty stew for dinner. Her back ached from the unaccustomed work, but she welcomed the distraction. Orville returned at sundown, bringing with him the smells of horses, leather, and open air. He paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed kitchen and the pot bubbling on the stove. You've been busy, he observed, hanging his hat on a peg. It's the least I could do. Sarah stirred the stew. Mrs. Quinn came by with the supplies. Please, let me pay you back when I can. No need, he cut her off. Thomas would have done the same for me. They ate dinner in a more comfortable silence than breakfast, the stew and fresh bread filling the kitchen with homely aromas that seemed to soften the atmosphere between them. This is good, Orville said after several spoonfuls. Better than anything I've managed in a long time. Sarah smiled at the compliment. My mother taught me to cook when I was young, said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach. As soon as the words left her mouth, she flushed, embarrassed by the unintended implication. Orville merely nodded. Smart woman, your mother. After dinner, as Sarah washed the dishes, Orville surprised her by lingering in the kitchen rather than retreating to the porch with his usual evening cigarette. Mrs. Quinn mentioned you lost your family, Sarah said quietly, her back to him as she worked. I'm sorry. A long silence followed, and she feared she had overstepped. It was a long time ago, he finally replied, his voice rough. After the war, I thought the worst was behind us. Then the influenza came. He paused. Joseph was only 4. Sarah turned, drying her hands on her apron. I lost my parents to typhoid when I was 16. I thought the world had ended. She met his gaze. But somehow, we keep going. Some days are harder than others. Orville stood, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I've got an early start tomorrow. Good night, Mrs. Daniels. Good night, Mr. Zane. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Orville would rise before dawn, tend to the early morning chores, and join Sarah for breakfast before heading out to work the ranch with his 2 hired hands, Miguel and Jasper. Sarah kept house, cooked meals, and gradually added her touch to the sparse home wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains sewn from fabric Dorothy had brought. small comforts that transformed the house. A week into her stay, Orville returned from town with a rocking chair, carried it awkwardly into the sitting room, and set it down without ceremony. "Thought you might need it," he mumbled when Sarah stared at him in surprise. "For when the baby comes." The gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "That's very thoughtful." "Dorothy suggested it," he said quickly, as if to deflect the credit. But Sarah noticed how the chair had been sanded smooth, the wood polished to a gentle shine, work done by hand, not by a store. As July faded into August, the summer heat intensified, making Sarah's pregnancy more uncomfortable. She grew heavier, her movements more labored, but she refused to slow down. Each morning, she rose with Orville, prepared meals, kept the house, and in the evenings, she often sat on the porch, reading her Bible or mending clothes while watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes Orville joined her, sitting in companionable silence or occasionally sharing stories of the day's work. Bit by bit, she learned about him, how he'd grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith, how he'd joined the Union Army more out of duty than conviction, how he'd come west after losing his family, seeking a place where memories couldn't follow. In turn, she told him about her life, her childhood in Ohio, meeting Thomas at a church social, their dreams of building a life together in the West, where land was plentiful and opportunities endless. "He was so certain the mine would make our fortune," she said one evening, her voice tinged with regret. "I tried to convince him to try ranching instead. He was good with animals." "Most men get caught up in the promise of striking it rich," Orville replied. "Harder to see the value in patient work that pays off slow and steady." "Like ranching?" she asked with a small smile. "Exactly like ranching." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Though some days, when the cattle are being particularly stubborn, mining doesn't sound half bad." Their laughter mingled in the evening air, and something shifted between them, a door opening just a crack, letting in a sliver of light. The next morning, Sarah woke to unfamiliar pains. She tried to ignore them, focusing on preparing breakfast. But by the time Orville came in from the barn, she was gripping the edge of the table, her face pale. "Mrs. Daniels? Sarah?" Alarm colored his voice as he rushed to her side. "What is it?" "The baby," she gasped. "It's too early." Panic flashed across Orville's face. "I'll fetch the doctor." "No time," she managed through gritted teeth. "Baby's coming now." For a moment, Orville stood frozen. Then his military training kicked in. "Miguel!" he bellowed toward the barn. When the ranch hand appeared, he barked, "Ride for the doctor and Mrs. Quinn. Fast as you can." Inside, he helped Sarah to her bed, his movements gentle despite his obvious fear. "What do you need?" "Clean sheets," she panted. "Water, towels." Another contraction seized her, and she cried out. Orville gathered the supplies, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, uncharacteristic vulnerability in his voice. Sarah's eyes, bright with pain, met his. "Just don't leave me alone." He took her hand, his grip firm. "I won't." The labor progressed quickly, too quickly. By the time Dorothy Quinn arrived, Sarah was already fully dilated, her face beaded with sweat. "The doctor's delivering another baby across town," Dorothy explained, rolling up her sleeves. "But I've helped birth plenty of babies in my time." Orville moved to leave, but Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." Something in her eyes made refusal impossible. He nodded, settling beside her, offering his strength as she began to push. The room filled with Sarah's cries, Dorothy's calm instructions, and Orville's low words of encouragement. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, a new sound joined them, the indignant wail of a newborn. "It's a boy," Dorothy announced, wrapping the tiny red-faced infant in a clean towel. Small but strong. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as Dorothy placed the baby in her arms. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing a finger over his delicate features. "Hello, Thomas." Orville stood silent, watching the tableau before him. When Sarah looked up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion, something broke open inside him, a feeling he'd thought long dead, buried alongside Margaret and Joseph. "He's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Would you like to hold him?" Sarah asked, offering the bundled infant. Hesitantly, Orville accepted the tiny burden, his large hands suddenly awkward. The baby squirmed, then settled against his chest, one miniature hand escaping the blanket to grasp at air. "He likes you," Sarah said softly. Orville looked down at the infant, then back at Sarah, his eyes suspiciously bright. "He's a fighter, like his mother." The days following little Thomas's birth were a blur of exhaustion, wonder, and adjustment. The doctor finally arrived, pronounced both mother and child healthy despite the early arrival, and instructed Sarah to rest as much as possible, advice she promptly ignored. "I can't just lie here while you do all the work," she protested when Orville insisted on handling the cooking and cleaning in addition to his ranch duties. "You just brought a new life into the world," he countered, his tone brooking no argument. "Rest now, work later." To Sarah's surprise, Orville proved remarkably capable with the infant. His initial awkwardness gave way to a natural ease, his large hands gentle as he cradled little Thomas or changed his wrappings. Sometimes she would wake in the night to find him already there, rocking the fussing baby and murmuring stories about cattle drives and mountain passes. "You're good with him," she observed one evening, as Orville walked the colicky infant around the sitting room. A shadow crossed his face. "I had practice once." She understood then that he was thinking of Joseph, the son he had lost. Impulsively, she reached out, touching his arm. "Thomas is lucky to have you in his life." Orville looked down at her, something unnamed passing between them. "I'm the lucky one," he said quietly. As August turned to September and then to October, the dynamic between them continued to evolve. Sarah regained her strength and resumed her duties around the house, while also caring for Thomas. Orville made subtle changes to accommodate the new additions to his life, building a cradle for the infant, rearranging the sitting room to create a play area, ordering books on child care from Denver. Word spread through the small community about the widow and child staying at Raven Creek Ranch. On Sundays, when Sarah insisted on attending church in town, she found herself welcomed warmly, though not without curious glances and whispered speculation. "Pay them no mind," Dorothy advised after one particularly obvious exchange of whispers. "People will talk, regardless of what you do." "I know what they're thinking," Sarah replied, adjusting Thomas in her arms. "A widow living with an unmarried man. It's not proper." "Proper doesn't keep you fed or your baby warm," Dorothy said practically. "Besides, anyone with eyes can see Orville respects you." What Dorothy didn't say, but Sarah increasingly sensed, was that Orville's feelings ran deeper than respect. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression a complex mixture of longing and uncertainty. And more troubling, she found herself thinking of him in ways that made her flush with guilt. Thomas had been gone less than a year. Was it disloyal to feel this awakening interest in another man? And yet, in the quiet moments when she was honest with herself, Sarah acknowledged that what was growing between her and Orville was something rare and precious. A second chance at happiness neither had expected. The situation came to a head one crisp November evening. Thomas, now 3 months old and thriving, had finally fallen asleep after a fussy day. Sarah joined Orville on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. "Winter's coming early this year," Orville observed, looking at the mountains where snow already capped the highest peaks. "We should think about making arrangements." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Arrangements?" "For you and Thomas." His voice was carefully neutral. "The journey to Denver would be difficult once the heavy snows come." She stared at him, cold seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the weather. "You want us to leave?" Orville wouldn't meet her eyes. "I assumed you'd want to return to the city eventually. Better opportunities there for you and the boy." "I see." Sarah clutched her shawl tighter. "And is that what you want?" A muscle worked in his jaw. "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." Her voice strengthened. "After everything we've been through these past months, I think I deserve honesty from you, Orville." The use of his first name, something she rarely did, seemed to break something loose in him. He turned to her, his eyes turbulent. "You deserve better than an aging rancher with nothing to offer but a hard life in a harsh land," he said roughly. "Thomas is going to need education, opportunities, things I can't provide here." "That's not what I asked." Sarah moved closer, her heart pounding. "I asked what you want." "What I want?" A bitter laugh escaped him. I want what I have no right to ask for. I want you and Thomas to stay. I want to watch that boy grow up. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're under my roof. His voice dropped. I want things I swore I'd never want again after Margaret died. Sarah reached out, her hand finding his. And if I told you I want those things too? Orville stilled, searching her face. Sarah, I came here with nothing but grief and a Bible, she said softly. You gave me shelter, support, respect, and somewhere along the way, I found something I thought died with Thomas' hope for a future. Her fingers tightened around his. I don't want to go back to Denver. I want to stay here with you. For a long moment, Orville said nothing, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Then, slowly, he raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. I'm not a perfect man, he warned. I'm set in my ways, stubborn as a mule sometimes. A smile tugged at her lips. I've noticed. The life I'm offering isn't easy. Ranch work is hard. The winters are brutal. Orville, she interrupted gently. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for a chance to build something meaningful, together. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the soft rustle of wind through dying leaves, the steady rhythm of her own heart. Then Orville's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch tentative, as if she might vanish beneath his fingers. I never thought I'd get a second chance, he murmured. Neither did I. Sarah leaned into his touch. Maybe that's what makes it precious. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. It felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once familiar and thrilling, safe and exhilarating. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Dorothy and her husband as witnesses and baby Thomas gurgling happily in Dorothy's arms during the ceremony. The town turned out in force, curious to see the culmination of what had become the local romance of the year. Sarah wore a simple dress of deep blue, sewn by her own hands from fabric Orville had ordered specially from Denver. He stood tall and proud in a new suit, his usual stoicism giving way to a smile that transformed his weathered face. I, Orville, take you, Sarah, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Sarah repeated the vows, her voice clear and sure, she felt the rightness of it settle in her bones. This wasn't the future she had envisioned when she'd set out from Denver, pregnant and desperate. It was something better, a future built on mutual respect, shared strength, and a love that had grown naturally, like a hardy wildflower pushing through rocky soil. Their first winter as husband and wife tested them immediately. December brought blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time, forcing them to rely entirely on each other and their preparations. Orville taught Sarah the rhythms of ranch life, how to predict weather from the behavior of animals, how to preserve food to last through lean times, how to find joy in the small moments of beauty amid hardship. In the evenings, while snow piled against the windows and wind howled across the plains, they created their own warmth. Orville would read aloud from one of his books, while Sarah mended or knitted by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories from their pasts or dreams for their future. I never thought I'd feel this content again, Orville confessed one night as they lay together, the ranch house creaking around them in the winter wind. After Margaret and Joseph died, I convinced myself that the best I could hope for was to exist, not to live. Sarah traced the lines of his face in the dim light. And now, his arms tightened around her. Now, I'm living again, because of you and Thomas. Spring came late but gloriously to the Colorado mountains. The ranch burst into activity as calves were born, fields planted, and repairs made to fences and buildings damaged by winter storms. Sarah threw herself into the work alongside Orville, learning to ride astride, scandalizing some of the more traditional townspeople, helping with the garden, and even assisting with the gentler livestock. Thomas thrived, growing from an infant to a curious, crawling baby who delighted in exploring every corner of the ranch house. His first word, to Orville's undisguised pride, was "Pa," a moment that brought tears to both adults' eyes. "Is it wrong that I want him to call me that?" Orville asked that night, his voice uncertain. "I'm not trying to replace his real father." Sarah kissed him gently. "You're the only father he'll ever know, Orville. Thomas, my Thomas, would be grateful that his son has a good man to raise him." As Thomas's first birthday approached, Sarah realized with surprise that she had been at Raven Creek Ranch for over a year. The desperate widow who had arrived with nothing but a Bible and unborn child seemed like a different person, now someone from a story she might tell Thomas when he was older. The night before the small celebration they had planned for Thomas's birthday, Sarah sat on the porch with Orville, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Thomas was already asleep inside, worn out from a day of toddling after the ranch's gentle old dog. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, her voice both nervous and excited. Orville turned to her, brows raised in question. "I'm going to have another baby." She took his hand, placing it over her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months, if my figuring is right." For a moment, Orville simply stared at her. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, the uninhibited joy of a man who had found his way back to happiness against all odds. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "Our baby! Our baby," she echoed, burying her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather, sunshine, and home. Their second child, a daughter they named Hope, was born the following winter, a healthy, robust baby, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Thomas, now a talkative toddler, approached his sister with solemn curiosity, declaring her tiny but acceptable. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under Orville's careful management, allowing them to add on to the house, hire more hands, and eventually build a small schoolhouse on the property that served the children of neighboring ranches as well as their own growing family. 2 more children joined them, William, born 3 years after Hope, and Margaret, named for Orville's first wife, who arrived 2 years later. The house that had once echoed with lonely silence now rang with laughter, arguments, music from the piano Orville surprised Sarah with on their 5th anniversary, and the everyday sounds of a family fully alive. Sarah never forgot her first husband, keeping his photograph on the mantel alongside pictures of their growing family. Thomas, their firstborn, grew up knowing about the brave man he was named for, the father who had died before holding him. On quiet evenings, Orville would sometimes tell the children stories about his friend from the war, ensuring that Thomas Daniels remained a presence in their lives. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival at Raven Creek Ranch, Sarah found herself standing in the same spot where Orville had first greeted her, a desperate widow, with nothing but faith to sustain her. Now, the ranch stretched out before her, green and thriving in the summer sun. Children's voices carried from the creek where Orville was teaching them to fish. The Bible she had clutched so desperately that day sat on a shelf in their bedroom, still well used but no longer her only possession, no longer her only source of comfort. "Penny for your thoughts," Orville said, coming up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. Sarah leaned back against his chest, content. "I was just thinking about journeys, how sometimes the end looks nothing like what you imagined at the beginning." "Disappointed?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice, though she heard the genuine question beneath. She turned in his arms, taking in the face she had come to love so deeply older now, lined with a decade's worth of weather and worry and joy, but still the face of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "The exact opposite," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "I came here looking for shelter. You gave me a home. I came with only hope for survival. You gave me a future filled with love." Orville's arms tightened around her. "We built it together, Sarah. Everything we have, the ranch, the family, this life, we built it together." As the sun began to set over Raven Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief that had nearly broken her, the desperate gamble of seeking out her late husband's war friend, the slow blossoming of unexpected love. "Ma, Pa, "Look what I caught!" Thomas called from the creek, proudly holding up a wriggling fish while his siblings cheered and the family dog barked excitedly. Sarah and Orville exchanged a smile, then walked hand in hand toward their children, toward the future they continued to build day by day. The past remained a part of them, honored and remembered, but no longer a shadow over their happiness. What had begun in loss and desperation had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to resilience, to second chances, to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As the family gathered for dinner that evening, laughing, talking over each other, sharing the day's adventures, Sarah placed her worn Bible on the table, as she did every night before the meal. Orville reached for her hand, and the children, following their example, joined hands around the table. "For what we are about to receive," Orville began the familiar blessing, his voice deep and sure. "And for all that we have been given, we are truly grateful," the children chimed in together. Sarah squeezed Orville's hand, her heart full as she looked at the faces around the table. Her husband, their children, this family forged from the ashes of loss and grief. The words of the psalm she had whispered to herself on her first night at the ranch came back to her. No longer a desperate prayer, but a fulfilled promise. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." In the simple ranch house that had become a home, surrounded by the family that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the Colorado sunset painted the mountains in gold and purple. The same mountains that had witnessed her arrival years ago, a pregnant widow with nothing but a Bible and fading hope. The land remained unchanged in its essential nature, beautiful but demanding, harsh yet bountiful to those who worked it with respect and persistence. Much like love itself, Sarah reflected as she gazed at Orville across the dinner table, their eyes meeting in the understanding that comes from years of shared joys and sorrows. Like the land, love required tending, demanded honesty, and sometimes extracted a painful price. But the harvest it yielded this life they had built together was worth every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, every difficult choice. Their journey had not ended that day when Orville had taken in a desperate stranger. It had only begun a journey they continued to make together day by day, season by season, their footprints side by side across the landscape of their shared life. And in that knowledge, in that deep and abiding certainty, Sarah found the future she had once thought lost forever.